Here's the video for the word explicit. Explicit. So notice that the stress is on the li, explicit. This word in Spanish is explícito. And the definitions that you have here are both adjectives. One is clear and easy to understand, and the second one is saying something clearly, exactly, and openly. Word families, you have explicitly, which is an adverb, and you guys should probably know by now li, ly, that means mente. It has the same meaning as the Spanish suffix mente, so explícitamente. And explicit has synonyms, the same meaning. They are specific, plain, straightforward, and definite. Antonym is the opposite of the word. So the antonym for explicit is implicit. And you guys will notice, if you look at your list, that this week we actually have two opposite words in the same week. So explicit is today's word, and then later in the week we will have on one of the cards, one of the words you need to know is the opposite word, which is implicit. So when we get to that one, I'm going to explain what implicit means. But today I'm going to focus on what explicit means. So explicit, as it says here, is clear and easy to understand. So let's look at that definition in more detail. So for example, you can use explicit. It's an adjective. You know, an adjective is a describing word. It describes a noun. So it could describe, for example, the teacher's instructions. So if we say the teacher's instructions were very explicit, that means they were very clear and easy to understand. So the students knew what to do. And another way to say clear is like direct. So if you have instructions, instructions should be very clear, very direct. If the instructions are not clear and not direct, it can be hard to figure out what you're supposed to do. So good instructions are explicit. And you know, when I write worksheets, I try to make my instructions very explicit so that people can understand what I want them to do. I try to make the instructions very clear. So here, this meaning one is explicit to describe a thing, like for example instructions. But explicit can also describe a person, so that's going to be the next definition. The next definition describes a person, and if a person is explicit, that means that a person says things clearly, exactly, and openly, like directly. So this is the exact same picture. I gave you the same picture because it's the same situation. It's just now we can make a sentence. So last time I said the instructions were explicit. I can also make a sentence about the teacher, saying the teacher is very explicit when she gives her instructions. So here it's basically the same idea of like clear and direct, but here it's not describing the instructions, it's describing the person who gives the instructions. But it's still the same situation. When somebody says something very clearly and very directly, you can either say that the thing they say, like the instructions, is clear, or you can say that the person is clear. But what does that mean? That means that the person is communicating clearly. So they're very, very similar, really. It's just one describes the instructions. Usually, and I say instructions is a good, it's a good example for this. It's often used with instructions. Instructions, it could also be like message. You can have an explicit message, and then we'll see on the next few days that the opposite of an explicit message is an implicit message on the other card. An explicit message is a clear, direct message. So if somebody directly tells you what they want, what they mean. So, for example, we learned about fables, fabulas, in quarter one of English 1. So fables have explicit messages because in a fable, you say directly right at the end, the moral of the story is, and that is stated directly. The writer, well, often with fables we don't know who wrote it, but it says, the fable at the end says very directly a message about life. That's an explicit message. That contrasts with when we learn about Big Ten words and we learn about theme or message. Often in literature, except for fables, fables are an exception. Las fábulas son una excepción, pero normalmente en la literatura los autores no nos dicen directamente su mensaje. Tenemos que averiguar su mensaje. Eso es lo opuesto de esto explicit. Eso es implicit si tenemos que averiguar. And we'll learn more about that, as I said, when we see the card that talks about the word implicit. So before we finish the video, I'm going to show you here is a sentence with explicit, and talking about that sort of a message that is beyond what's explicit. So many times in writing, there is a message for the author. The author is giving some kind of message, but the author often doesn't directly say. Author often is not explicit and does not directly say the message is this. So what this sentence is saying, this is a sentence applying this to literature, and it says to really understand a story, go beyond más allá, from the explicit, just beyond the explicit descriptions, that what the story actually directly, clearly says. You have to look beyond that to discover the author's message, because the author does not often tell you the message directly. So you have to guess the message by reading the description of what happens in the story and then go beyond that más allá to find the author's message. Okay, hope that makes sense. I will say one more thing about this word, which is not on the card, but that you might notice, is that another use of explicit, not on the card, a third definition, is that explicit can sometimes mean showing sexual things, basically, or using bad language, inappropriate language, and that is kind of related to this because, often, what should I say? Sexual things are, people don't consider it appropriate to show them clearly. They're private. They shouldn't be shown publicly or openly. And so if somebody does, then that we use the word explicit to describe that, and it could be a bad thing. Often also, like you might notice on music, they'll say explicit lyrics, como letra explícita, I guess it would be. And what does that mean? That means that it's like being too clear in a way in the lyrics of that song. Why? Because they use bad words, usan groserías, y groserías muchas veces hablan de qué? Hablan de the subjects that people don't talk directly about, like sex. So that's also based on this. This is the basic meaning, but then it's expanded to mean that, like I said, inappropriate sexual things or inappropriate language. So that's good to know. Like especially if you have any teenagers and they're listening to music. If it says explicit lyrics, that means bad language. But you don't need to know that for the card. I just thought I would also explain it because it's an extra meaning of explicit that has developed. Comenzó con los significados que están en la carta, pero ya this other meaning developed later. Okay, thank you very much, and that's the end of my video. Thanks for watching.